Hi guys, and welcome back. So last lesson we looked at what Russia was like in 1897 and 1900. So the idea of there being a very hierarchical society, the idea of there being a very patriarchal society. Now, so the variance in wealth of the upper and lower classes in Russian society. Now, to add to these issues, Russia also underwent an industrial revolution. Just like England, when we had an industrial revolution, this led to profound changes in the way people worked and where they lived. Now, this was actually probably one of the most important, I'm going to say the word latent, so latent means kind of underlying, latent factors in why the revolution happened. Because what we'll see in a moment is that we have huge migration of people from the countryside where they're working on farms to the cities, and they're living in very concentrated, poor conditions. Now, when people get together in smaller spaces, in concentrated conditions, often in cities, they start to talk about their dissatisfaction. And then at that point, that's where they start to demand change. So industrialization means the growth of factories, and it also means urbanization. Now, urbanization is when people move from the countryside to the towns and cities. In Russia, the population of these towns and cities multiplied 4 times. So you can imagine the amount of people leaving the countryside and moving into the cities. Working conditions were absolutely terrible in these factories, and trade unionism was banned. So trade unions in Britain were created to try and help and ensure that workers' rights were adhered to and protected. And if there are any problems, a trade union will help represent workers to make sure these problems get resolved. Now, without trade unions, there's very little protection over the pay and the safety of workers. So many workers in these Russian factories were working 11, 12-hour days, and living conditions were horrendous, basically. Lots of people living in communal houses with shared toilets and washrooms. Some were forced to sleep in the factories themselves. Very little bedding, very little hygiene. Now, in 1893, Sergei Witte was appointed Minister of Finance, and he tried to encourage some reforms in order to help those in Russia. He wanted to expand the Trans-Siberian Railway, which I put behind me. So that's the railway line that connects Russia up. So remember last video, I was talking about how big Russia is. Well, this is a railway line that was designed to connect Russia and to connect the different cities. So he wanted to expand that railway line. He also wanted to reform the Russian currency, and he did so, which improved the value of the ruble, which was really, really good. Now, Witte wanted to add more democracy to Russia, and if his proposals had been listened to, he might have actually managed to save the Romanovs from their fate. Tsar Nicholas, the king of the country, pushed Witte to continue with industrialization, which would only increase the number of working class in towns and exacerbate the existing problems. Now, at the same time as all of this is going on, the country is being ruled by a royal family, and that royal family is the Romanovs, and they're sitting behind me. The Romanov family had ruled Russia since 1617, and by the 1900s, that means they'd been in power in Russia for almost 300 years. Now, the Romanov family were related to lots of the royal families in Europe. It was actually Queen Victoria who predominantly created this, I guess, dynasty across Europe because she had so many children. Her children went off and married into lots of the different royal families across Europe, and we end up with lots and lots of connections. Now, it's often talked about, actually, and I think it's really interesting, how similar the Tsar Nicholas looked to his cousin, who was actually the current King of England, George V. So we've got George on this side, and we've got Tsar Nicholas on this side. And you can see they're cousins, but they look incredibly similar. And this was often talked about at the time. Now, Nicholas was engaged, and he married a German princess, Alexandra. And by 1904, they had 5 children. So 4 girls and 1 son, Alexei. Now, Alexei, who's down here, the heir to the Russian throne, suffered from a blood disease that was, it was a genetic disease that was actually in Alexandra's family. So it was the disease called hemophilia. Now, this means that your blood doesn't clot properly. And if you have a small scratch or a knock, you can actually bleed quite uncontrollably. So the family were quite concerned about Alexei's life for a lot of his early childhood. And, you know, keeping him safe was one of the big priorities of the family as the only son and heir to the Russian throne. Now, the family didn't dare share this secret with the country or the world, you know, that their heir was so weak, as he was seen at the time for having his poor health. So he was kind of very much treasured and loved by the family. He was not shunned at all for this by his own family, but they wanted to keep that secret safe. Nicholas was you know, really well known for being a family man, and he very much loved his wife and children very much. His daughters were Olga, Tatiana, Maria, and Anastasia. If I just move, so we've got the girls here, and you know, they were rumored to be, or they were spoken about being, some very, very beautiful young ladies as they grew up. The family in total was often talked about being a very beautiful family. You know, lots of life and soul and happy memories they had with each other. Now, Anastasia, who's the little one here, is the girl that all the stories are written about. You know, I think it's a Disney Pixar or something. And there's lots and lots of rumors about, you know, whether Anastasia got out or not. But, you know, I think they've proven quite recently that perhaps she did not, unfortunately. But we can live in the hope and dream that she managed to escape, I guess.